So welcome, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, and happy Friday, at least in the United States and in much of the world. A special thank you to those who are joining outside of your working hours. I'm super glad that you're here. Quick note, just logistically, this presentation is being recorded, and it will be shared later with those who could not attend. So just be aware of that. A few additional housekeeping notes. We will have about 20 to 30 minutes for discussion at the end of today's presentation. You can participate in one of three ways. So the first is by adding your thoughts and questions to the chat. Two, by submitting your question through the Q&A feature, which is at the bottom of your screen. And then the third option, you can actually request to be unmuted, and you can then share your answer verbally. If you'd like to do that, you can go ahead and raise your hand and I will unmute you. Otherwise, I think that because this is a webinar, you will automatically stay muted. But just in case, I ask you to make sure that you are muted to reduce background noise. So I wanted to share some brief context, really short. My name is Samantha Abrams. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the head of collections at the Center for Research Libraries. So I joined the organization almost exactly 1 year ago to the day. I think I'm about 4 days off. And one reason that I joined was because of the promise of working with really thoughtful colleagues around the globe, which you'll really see a great representation of today. Much of the planning that went into this event is going to be visible here. Our original plan, of course, was to have a 3-day conference on site at the Center for Research Libraries in Chicago, but we are living in a time of a ever-changing pandemic. So we did make the decision when Omicron spiked to turn this into something virtual. We pivoted to what we're calling our Diversity is Knowledge series, which explores how centering diversity, inclusivity, and equity in research libraries has implications for enriching sources of knowing, the ways of knowing, and the quality of knowledge production itself. Additional Diversity is Knowledge gatherings will take place virtually in June, August, October, and December of this year, as well as February of 2023. So it's 6 sessions total. Each of these gatherings will provide a forum for practitioners and scholars to reckon with the past, presents, and futures of library work across global, diasporic, national, and local contexts. The gatherings are open to all, regardless of institutional affiliation or membership status with the Center for Research Libraries. Our first session is something truly great. I think you're really in for a wonderful treat this Friday. I am going to turn it over now to Esmeralda Kale. But first, I want to acknowledge the planning committee that made this possible. Esmeralda, I know you'll name these folks as well, but it doesn't hurt to name them twice. So we have Brian Vivier, the Chinese Studies Librarian and Coordinator of Area Studies Collections at the University of Pennsylvania. Lori Taylor, the Senior Director for Library Technology and Digital Strategies at the University of Florida. Esmeralda Kale, the George and Mary Lacron Foster Curator for the Melville J. Herskovitz Library of African Studies at Northwestern University, and Emily Sangolo, the Senior Librarian for African, Global, and Francophone Studies and Social Sciences, and the Curator of International and Area Studies for Libraries at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. This work would truly not be possible without them, and I am deeply grateful for their tireless work. Esmeralda, I will turn it over to you.
Greetings. So, as Samantha mentioned, I'm part of a small team of colleagues within the ICCG that have been focused on the conference. This team is made up of Emily Sangolo at the University of Wisconsin, Lori Taylor at the University of Florida, Brian Bivier at the University of Pennsylvania, and of course, Samantha Abrams, who is at CRL, who has been with us throughout all of our discussions. When we realized that due to COVID, it might not be possible to meet in person and have a conference keynote, our thoughts within the ICCG turned to how to have a series of meaningful conversations, a series of conversations around the theme of diversity as knowledge. This, of course, led to brainstorming around possible speakers. Who could we invite to speak that would inform, inspire, and disrupt the membership, push us outside of our usual models of thinking? Our first speaker to kick off this series of conversations is Dr. Reggie Raju. Dr. Raju is the Director of Research and Learning at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. He holds a PhD in Information Studies from the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban. Dr. Raju has been involved in academic libraries for more than 35 years. He has published several book chapters and is also the author of several articles in national and international peer-reviewed journals. Let me just provide you with a sample of a few titles to his articles. Unionizing Library and Information Staff in the Tertiary Sector, Libraries, Driving Access to Knowledge, Promoting Open Scholarship in Africa. His area of specialization is research libraries, more specifically, open access in library publishing. He is a member of the Academic and Research Libraries Standing Committee of IFLA and has served as the convener of a special interest group in library publishing. Dr. Raju is a member of the editorial board of the Journal of Scholarly Communication. He has served as the chair of SPARC Africa, an organization that drives the social justice agenda of access within Africa. SPARC has chapters worldwide. It supports systems for research that are open by default and equitable by design, where open access, open data, open education all fall under their umbrella. More recently, Dr. Raju has been a project innovator of a newly developed continental platform for open access publishing in Africa, hosted at the University of Cape Town. The platform allows the African research community to take ownership of creating and sharing its own scholarly content, including open access journals and open access monographs and textbooks, which contributes to the growth and development of local research for African societies. He says, and I quote, "In order to train library staff at other African universities, in order to train library staff at other African universities, we must work together if we want to demolish barriers to African research so that our institutions are able to produce and publish their own knowledge." He also says, financial challenges and lack of technical infrastructure shouldn't be a barrier to being able to disseminate good research widely. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Reggie Raju. Over to you, Dr. Raju.
Thank you very much, Esmeralda. I just want to make sure that I have my presentation up. And I'm going to ask I'm making the assumption that you can see my presentation.
Yeah, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Once again, Esmeralda, thank you very much. And greetings to all of the attendees. I must also say thank you to the CRL for the opportunity to share my perspectives on the need to diversify the knowledge economy. I also must say a big thank you to both Samantha and Brian for their guidance, for their support to getting me to this point of sharing this information. Before I continue, I must also apologize for the busyness of my slides. I generally do that to accommodate my accent and pronunciation, which may pose a challenge to colleagues. So hence my apology for the busyness of my slides. Okay. In preparing for this presentation, I did an in-depth scan of the literature, and there were 3 comments that stood out for me. I used these 3 comments as the golden thread to pull this presentation together. The first is by Sharon, who says that, and I quote, 20 years after the open access movement began, we are still far from a truly open access world of knowledge exchange. The second comment is by Jamon and Moja, who assert, and I quote, geographic bias in academic research assessment is an indicator of the struggles with unequal power relationships between the global north and the global south as far as knowledge production is concerned. And the third comment is by Bruna, who shares that, and I quote, one of the great ironies of open access is that you grant authors around the world the ability to finally read the scientific literature that was completely closed off to them. But, and this is the important thing, but it ends up excluding them from publishing in the same journals. Bruna brings to the fore the inherent paradox in the move towards open. The debate is that the current publishing ecosystem perpetuates the knowledge divide between the global north and the global south, despite the portrayed progress to open. The philanthropic underpinnings of the open access movement are not universal. They are not universal, as asserted by Jamon and Moja, as geographic bias still prevails and negates opportunities to diversify knowledge. In effect, it is my view that the unchecked continuation along the current trajectory perpetuates systemic inequalities, marginalization, and global colonialism. It violates the principles associated with information democracy. Global North conceptualized and rolled out interventions such as APCs, transformative agreements, rights retention, in my opinion, does very little to diversify the knowledge economy. I would like to share a little of my background to contextualize my lens of the diversification of information for the growth of research and ultimately for the growth of society. I am a son of indentured laborers who were brought to South Africa to cultivate the sugarcane fields. As indentured laborers, we were brought up to be grateful for the small mercies in life. It was an era where discrimination was legalized through the apartheid system. Discrimination was a way of life. Our education by law was based on the fact that people of color should be educated to be good laborers, to be good domestic help and such. The domino effect was limited job opportunities. And if you were fortunate to break out of that mold, then you had to deal with job reservation or job subjugation. I started in the library, I started in libraries as a messenger, as people of color, without formal qualifications, were not allowed to work behind the issue desk. Over time, I obtained the required qualifications and I moved up the hierarchy. So as you can see, my lens and interpretation of diversity is reflective of my experiences. It is from a real life view of deprivation and marginalization. I am one of those fortunate ones. My context may be different to that of yours. Hence, me sharing this particular lens through which I view the issue at hand. I'm going to share a perspective from this privileged position. I consider it as a privileged position of deprivation, with the hope that real life experience can inform colleagues to work towards changing the knowledge landscape, to advance strategies for an inclusive knowledge system. The theme of CRL meeting for 2022 is, as shared by Esmeralda and Samantha, diversity as knowledge. It explores centering diversity, inclusivity, and equity in research libraries for enriching and diversifying sources of knowing. The concepts of diversity, inclusivity, and equity are all within a social justice framework. There is a need to unlearn biases that one has unconsciously inculcated in before building a foundation for diversity or to unpractice. It is not about stopping the practice, it's about undoing the practice and developing new ones that support the diversification of knowledge systems. I believe that I've done a fairly thorough review of the literature, but I struggled to find articles that brought out the correlation between the concept of social justice and equity, equality, and inclusion. What I did find are numerous articles that uses these concepts interchangeably. It's my opinion that they are not interchangeable concepts. I would like to use the analogy of an onion. They are distinct layers. At the core is social justice, and then you have at the outer layers what ultimately gives birth to our aspiration for diversity, inclusion, and equity, and our aspirations to advance demarginalization, democratization, and colonialization. Central to this presentation is the concept of social justice. Social justice is viewed as the act of being fair and equitable and breaking down barriers to unfair practices and inequalities. John Rawls posits that social justice promotes the protection of equal access to liberties, rights, and opportunities, as well as, and this is the critical issue, as well as taking care of the least advantaged members of society. The principles of fairness and justice underpins social justice. For me, academic libraries have an obligation. We have an obligation to ensure inclusive and equitable access and dissemination. It is not only access and dissemination of research. Unfortunately, global north architectured models, such as transformative agreements and APCs, do not uphold the principles of equity and inclusivity. In fact, it has the opposite effect of expanding the gulf. The concept of social justice, the concept is complex. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to use a very rudimentary understanding, which is the dismantling of structures that perpetuate exclusion and inequality. Using this as my cue, I am proposing that social justice be viewed as a two-step process. The first step is the deconstruction of structures that perpetuate inequality, exclusion, and marginalization. Here, I'm talking about the unlearning process, the unpracticing process. The second step is the reconstruction. We have deconstructed, now we're talking the reconstruction of the structures that advances equity. The geographic bias that Jamal and Moja referred to has to be addressed before we can respond to Brona's support for bi-directional flow of information. As indicated, the concepts of equity, equality, inclusion, and diversity are used interchangeably. And the persons who are contributing to the literature, for me in the main, are those who are in a position of privilege. And it is that privilege that gives them the license to perpetuate this misunderstanding. As I said, this is my view. Before getting into the process of equality, there has to be a significant push towards equity, because equality in an inequitable landscape is destructive and counterproductive. Okay, equality in an inequitable landscape is destructive. Equality without a preceding equitable process will exacerbate the divide, because giving both the privileged and the unprivileged, I'm not using the word underprivileged, I'm saying the privileged and the unprivileged, the same rights and opportunities will perpetuate the marginalization and at best, reduce the transformation to a snail's pace. I want to quickly look at the concept of diversity, because it filters right through this presentation. The concept of diversity itself is simple, as it refers to respecting the differences in racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, geographic, academic, or professional backgrounds. However, the process of diversifying is extremely complex. It is the context that directs the development of frameworks to address diversity. Within the higher education and open environment, there are a myriad of external factors that the librarian has to navigate to bring reality to the process. As librarians, we have the task of influencing the various sectors that contribute to the diversification process. I am going to focus on our roles as librarians and speak to the diversification of scholarly communication and publishing landscape. Okay. Let me reiterate the three golden threads mentioned earlier. Bruna talks about the bidirectional flow of information. Jamal and Moja talk about the geographic bias. And Sherlin talks about or searches for a truly open access movement. Information democracy is the socio-political system in which all people are guaranteed the right to benefit from access and dissemination of information resources. Information democracy deals with empowerment. It deals with the critical concepts of empowerment, ensuring that people have the tools and opportunities they need to participate in the decision-making processes that affect their daily lives. So let's do a reality check. At this point in time, is the concept of empowerment mainstream? If not, then diversity is out the door. Inclusivity will always be a vision and never a reality. Diversity is totally dependent on empowerment. No empowerment, no diversity. To advance a stable and healthy information democracy, there has to be the provision for access to information resources and the means for people to use that effectively. Access must include access to opportunities to disseminate information. Only when both access routes are opened will you have an informed and empowered research citizenry. When the privileged control access to information and knowledge, it tightens the reins on information and knowledge. Media and Kang point out that researchers based in the North have a wider global reach and are generally judged to be at the forefront of knowledge production and dissemination, while global South-based scholars are often not part of major debates and conversations in their field. This points to a severe imbalance. It points to a severe imbalance in the production of new knowledge. This imbalance highlights the inherent bias in the knowledge ecosystem. This imbalance is a disruptor to the quest for diversity in knowledge. I'm going to take a little bend in the road and talk to knowledge colonialism. Knowledge colonialism and diversity, in my view, are polar opposite concepts. As long as we continue with elements of knowledge colonialism, diversity will be a myth. Adebisi says that the damage done by colonialism to educational development in Africa is incalculable. There has been a transition from geographic colonialism, but what continues to persist is the smothering of scholarship, the suffocation of scholarship, as knowledge colonialism continues to dominate. In this knowledge colonialism era, and I know that I'm mixing histories, but in order to illustrate my point, I'm going to use this analogy of information aristocrats and information peasants. In this knowledge colonialism era, information aristocrats enjoy privileges and rights, and ultimately have near absolute control of the information ecosystem. They tend to manipulate the information peasants by forcing them to work according to criteria set by themselves. There is very little doubt that information peasants hold the lowest status in the publishing ecosystem, hence establishing the dominance of the information aristocrats. The information aristocrats, they own the lion's share of knowledge, of the knowledge production industry. The information aristocrats manipulate the information peasants through their actions, which confirms or consolidates marginalization and exclusion of the information peasants. The aristocrats vigorously promote assimilation. And it is the information peasants that fall prey to assimilation, as assimilation is seen by the information peasants as the key. That is the key to opening doors to publishing forums. Colleagues, I apologize for the cough. April Hathcock makes some very profound statements. She says that most conversations about scholarly communication are, and I quote, centered around, directed by, and saturated in the values and ideals of the white North American and West European researchers. This colonialism unleashes pressure on global South researchers to cite North American and European scholars rather than local scholars. This is exacerbated by institutional incentives to publish in high-profile Western journals. Meanwhile, publications by and for the global South, many of which cover regionally relevant topics, are neglected elsewhere. And these publications remain undervalued and underutilized. Again, this accentuates the need for diversity to acknowledge the value of global South research. For us to achieve Sherlin's truly open access movement, it is imperative that we expunge the bias and absorb divergent research findings. Pinet and Leon Himmelstein register another level of prejudice. They make the point that researchers from the global North usually lead research projects, while global South partners are invited. They are invited to join. Here is the other bias and the prejudice. As leaders of the project, global North researchers select research partners from the global South. But what they select are researchers who are well-known and who speak good English or have studied at global North universities. This practice leaves behind partners who only speak local languages or are less known, but have strong local knowledge. The information aristocrats use their position of privilege to control the knowledge economy. What is contestable is whether it is done knowingly or unknowingly. I will later in the presentation talk to the issue of conscious and unconscious bias. So if it is done unknowingly, then exposure, debate, discussion will help achieve the goal of diversifying knowledge with the domino effect of a richer way of knowing and improving the quality of knowledge production. However, if the privileged knowingly manipulate the knowledge economy, then much needs to be done to unlearn and relearn. And also to start to look at unpractice and repractice. There is a need for a mind shift. And the only people that can do this are us librarians, you and I. The power is in our hands. We must not deflect this responsibility. The challenge for librarians is to steer thinking away from profit and elitism towards open sharing and inclusion. We librarians have an obligation to diversify the knowledge base, to expose our researchers to diverse sources of knowledge. I must confess that it is unsettling when what I believe to be progressive minds do not see the difference between equity and equality. I've attended several discussions at USA forums, where the concept of diversity, equity, and equality are used interchangeably and without contestation. I presume I see the distinction easier given the lens that I default to. When we talk about diversity in education, when we talk about diversity in knowledge, one must embrace that there is a difference between inclusivity, equity, and equality. In the current uneven knowledge ecosystem, equality consolidates marginalization, equality consolidates exclusion, equality consolidates disenfranchisement. For me, in order to reach equality as an outcome, there is a need to confront the inequities within the research and knowledge landscape. The inequities manifest themselves in the biases. The prevalence of bias will always be a barrier to the diversification of knowledge systems. My position is that equality is viewed as providing the same level of opportunity and assistance to all, while equity is providing the various levels of support and assistance depending on specific needs. In South Africa, in our context, we refer it to as leveling the playing field before engaging in equality. I want to share my experience, which brings out the distinction between equality and equity, making those blurred lines distinctive. South Africa became a political democracy in 1994, and I use the word political democracy deliberately, after decades of colonialism and then apartheid. South Africa has one of the most progressive constitutions in the world, with a wide range of guarantees, including the right to basic education. This is an equality statement in the Bill of Rights. Despite the progressive nature of the Constitution, the vestiges of apartheid still lingers on, Currently, there are 3 tiers of school education. And this is what I'm talking about. But look, they are not formally, but have evolved in South African society. Pre-apartheid system and post-apartheid system. And this gives one a sense of inequities in the education system despite the progressive constitution. In the post-apartheid era, we have, as you would see here on the top left-hand corner, we have a school in a township. Then we have here what we refer to as a Model C school. These were previously white schools that were now allowing people of color to register and participate in the education system. And then we have the Model C, the private schools. I acknowledge that I am generalizing. It is the broader principles that I need to convey. Learners from the township schools, they are taught to answer an examination paper. That is what they do. They are taught, they are drilled to answer an examination paper. Learners from the Model C schools have a mixture of being taught to think more critically and answer an examination paper. While learners from the private schools, they are groomed to think critically and engage in discourse. Learners from all 3 school systems end up going to the same university, being in the same lecture hall, and are expected to produce the same level of innovation and research. The question that needs asking is is there opportunity for the openness movement to assist in leveling the playing field? I'm now going to move into the concept of inclusion, which is the process of improving the conditions for participation, which in this case would be the knowledge ecosystem. It is both a process and a goal. I would like to posit that promoting inclusion requires tackling exclusion by removing barriers to participation. This inclusion demands deliberate steps to facilitate participation. The geographic bias, the bias that perpetuate one directional flow of education, the conscious and unconscious bias, disempowers people. And this disempowerment must be removed for diversity to thrive, for diversity to start to grow and to become dominant. The core elements of inclusion are empowerment and promotion. Inclusion processes require both addressing the drivers of exclusion, such as policies and procedures, as well as discriminatory attitudes and behaviors. The biases that detract from diversity. There is a need for the redistribution. There is a need to redistribute power, status, and control over resources. There is a need to enrich inclusion through the addition of outcomes, through the addition of outcomes to goals. There is a need to bring the information aristocrats and the information peasants together. You have to bring them together to traverse the same road. This is by no way suggesting that there must be a compromise in academic rigor, but it is definitely suggesting that there must be a fair amount of lifting. There must be a fair amount of support to bridge the divide that has been created by colonialism, inequities, and information autocracy. There's very little debate that there are systemic inequalities embedded in the current knowledge ecosystem, compounding the information divide and alienating the research voices from the global south. The northernization of the publishing landscape exacerbates current knowledge hierarchies. The marginalization of research voices from the global south are deep-seated in the current northernized publishing landscape. In terms of the current knowledge hierarchies, the global north research will always be, there will always be the outer layer of the onion, with small chunks of the inner layer, and that is the research content from the global south, ever seeing the light of day. There's a very small chance that they will ever see the light of day. This assertion of layers of inequality is highlighted by Kwasi Bonayan, who says that science still bears the imprint of colonialism. Science still bears the imprint of colonialism. He goes on to share that titles such as Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine, the Journal of American Medical Association, BMJ, are meant to serve. They are meant to serve a particular purpose and audience, and therefore select researchers and research writings that fit that particular perspective. Unfortunately, such a practice does not promote diversity and inclusivity. In fact, it derails the openness movement. The open access movement has been hijacked. It has been captured by the information aristocrats. The geographic bias, the one-directional flow of information, goes against the open access grain. Diversity of knowledge will remain a pipe dream as long as conscious and unconscious bias persist. I've thus far shared social justice about breaking down barriers and reconstructing structures to advance diversity. Equity must precede equality. That empowerment cultivates inclusivity. That bias is destructive to the pursuit of diversity. For bias to have survived and thrived for as long as it has, there must be some very strong, whether voluntary or involuntary, there must be some very strong driving forces. Everyone pins it on the commercial publishers, but it is you and I. It is you and I that have aided and abetted the process. Over the decades, we have done little to challenge the might of the commercial publishers. And what we've done is we have sought self-consoling. We have sought deflection by saying that there was not much that could be done. However, in the last decade, much has been discussed about disrupting commercial publishers and advocating strongly for the sharing of research output. However, those inherent biases still linger on. We cannot blame this on the publishers. This is on you and me. As open access advocates, as librarians wanting to diversify knowledge systems. I would like to share the intensity of the stranglehold that the aristocrats have on the knowledge ecosystem. I was invited, together with my colleague Jill, to comment on a revised open access mandate by one of the leading open access movements. We commented on the document and brought to their attention that, in our opinion, not much has changed, as the document was still biased towards global north at the expense of the global south. And here is my response. So here is their response to my comment. It says, I'm reaching out on behalf of, and unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to name the movement. I'm reaching out on behalf of the steering committee to say thank you for the feedback that you provided on the draft. The steering committee has finalized the text. The steering committee isn't seeking any additional comments or feedback. But we would love to acknowledge you as a review on the website. And here is my response. I would prefer not to be acknowledged, as my contributions had no impact on the final document. I have been critical of global north-driven initiatives that purport to take the global south with it. The continuous development of initiatives through global north lens will never capture the real life experience of those from the global south. These are drivers of the open access movement across the world, as patronizing as ever. In fact, I would go as far as say that it is fraudulent. Having us there, acknowledging us as contributors, as reviewers of that, is fraudulent. But they are prepared to do that, to portray that we have been consultative and that we have been inclusive. You are wanting to acknowledge a global south commentator, even though you ignored all his comments. Tick boxing does not contribute to diversification. It does not contribute to diversification. It is the same wine in different bottles. In the case of publishers, we know that they are the adversaries. How can one promote diversity when the drivers of the movement are guilty of snuffing out diverse views? I've been talking about bias. Sorry, colleagues. This is the after effects of COVID, so I apologize for that. I will try to unpack bias within a predatory-prey relationship metaphor. This is not an arbitrary metaphor. This is exactly how I feel as a researcher. This is exactly how I feel as a journal manager. This is exactly how I feel as a librarian. The predator-prey relationship involves the detection of the prey, the pursuit, the capture of the prey, and then the feeding. This is a one-sided relationship. However, if the prey can band together, they can get the predator to reconsider the kill strategy, or retreat. For diversity to have a greater sense of meaning, to have a greater sense of influence, the predator needs to retreat, or at least reconsider its kill strategy. It is the predator who sets the ground rules. It is the predator who is in the position of power. And it is the predator with the greatest gains. And I'm sure you know, in this information system, who I believe the predator to be. Commercial publishers are the ones who determine the principles, the criteria for publication, the workflows that negate diversity. In pursuit of maximum profits, they need to manage the industry. They have to manage the industry and get the conspirators to conform. It is the editorial boards. It is the reviewers, which is basically you and I, and such that serve as the camouflage to lure the prey into the predator's feeding or feasting zones. We as librarians, we are fattening the predators by supporting the feeding frenzy, by supporting their hunting strategy, by conforming to the guidelines that consolidate the marginalization of Global South research voices. The editors and the peer reviewers are accomplices in a canned hunting strategy. For those who are not familiar with the concept of canned hunting, it is the killing of, of captive bred wild animals in small enclosures. The authors, the libraries are the captors, as they need to be in this prime feeding ground, as their research is dependent on access to what the predators control. In this enclosure, there is total domination of the publishing landscape by the information publishing aristocrats, with comforts, with comforts for the Global North authors via the opportunity to publish in high impact journals. Unfortunately, there are not many comforts for Global South authors, except for the scraps that may fall their way when they collaborate with Global North authors. This assertion of Global South authors feeding off the scraps is affirmed by Rowe, Nifuku, and Rabinsky. And they share that when selecting research topics, scholars from the Global South often have to choose between focusing their research on a topic of local interest or choosing topics that are more likely to be published in the top journals in their fields. Journals with high impact factors, they have editorial boards composed primarily of researchers in North America and Western Europe, which means that the scope of these journals is evaluated by the criteria that is set by the Global North. For me, my understanding, this is a master-slave relationship. The master has the power, and it is by the good grace of the master that the servant can have opportunities. There has to be a balance of power. The principles of equity need to become prominent. Only then, there is a balance of power, and can diversity then thrive? The quest for diversifying the knowledge ecosystem under the current circumstances, it's tantamount to putting a band-aid on a major injustice. Deep-rooted structural inequalities need to be challenged and dismantled, and new structures need to be developed. Inifuku and Rowe succinctly capture inequalities inherent in the current knowledge ecosystem. They say that while open access publishing advances equitable access to reading scholarly work, it does not automatically reverse the bias and norms of scholarship itself. The current trajectory of the open access movement, for me, is simply replicating biases. It's simply replicating the injustice endemic to the traditional knowledge ecosystem. The introduction and support of APCs, rights retention strategies and such. This may serve the global north well, but it does very, very little to be more inclusive of diverse views from the global south. The quest to diversify the knowledge ecosystem must go beyond panel beating. It must go beyond panel beating. There is a need for a reconstruction, building a viable alternative. We need to get our principals, our administrators, our leadership to give due recognition to these alternatives. Let us run both side by side. That is the commercial publishers and the uncaptured open access movement. We are doing this at the University of Cape Town. The library is the host to the formal press, that is Youth City Press, with the library as a publisher service. In the formal press process, we charge to outsource language editing and layout editing, while the author pays, and the author pays for this language and layout editing. In the library as a publisher service, in this stream, the author ensures that the book is language edited. We as a library, we do simple layout editing, and all of the technical costs are covered by the library as part of a new service model. Clearly, one of the greatest obstructions to the diversification of the knowledge ecosystem is the prevailing bias. The significant contributors to canned hunting are the biases and the shepherding of scholars to adapting to the guidelines of the commercial publishers. The editorial boards, the peer review communities serve as the camouflage for the predators. Geographic and language add to the camouflage. Collectively, these biases and other biases serve as the perfect foil for the perfect kill, as all scholars aspire for their research to be read and built on. This research watering hole serves as a magnet for canned hunting. All of us are gravitating to the one watering hole, knowing that we are being hunted by the predator. We seem to have little in terms of choice, but have we looked over the fence and appreciate the potential that the watering on the other side, where there are no predators? At that watering hole, there's plentiful of water. But we need to break through that fence to get there. If we want to diversify, if we want to be inclusive, we need to develop an action plan to break down. We have to break down that fence, because on the other side, we have control. on the other side, the power is in our hands and not in that of the commercial publishers. No matter what interventions are brought into play in the current knowledge ecosystem, it is still about commercial publishers making the largest profit possible. Samantha, I know I am going a little over time. Ma'am, may I continue?
Of course, yes, thank you.
Okay. So I want to now explore the whole issue of peer review. Again, I'm going to start with a comment by Inifuku and Charlotte Rowe, who share, and I quote, "If the editorial board representing the master narrative selects reviewers who, from their perspective, are qualified, the results are likely to reflect the same perspectives. If the master narrative does not change, if that master narrative does not change, then bias will persist. The domino effect is a triangle on social justice, as social justice is cast aside in this process. Another important obstacle to diversity, inclusion, and equity is the bias inherent in an industry dominated by reviewers and editors from the global north who may not be familiar with authors from the global south. I will demonstrate this later in the presentation. Often submissions from Africans have the best chance of being accepted for selective publication if they are co-authored by colleagues in the global north, even if the work comes mostly or exclusively from the global south. So let me take a step back. Historically, peer review was used to solicit support from experts in the field, to fill a scientific void, to provide support, or to validate findings. Over the years, commercial publishers have used peer review as a benchmark for excellence or to provide quality assurance. But this purpose is used strategically to support their brand, as it is the brand that earns them the profit. We must acknowledge that brand brings with it bias and ultimately subjectivity. As much as we allude to anonymized and double blind review, to demonstrate we use this to demonstrate quality assurance. There are underlying biases that dominate. I would like to share an example to demonstrate this bias. One of the more senior professors in South Africa in our discipline in library information science sent a paper to a US-based journal. The paper was rejected based on the fact that the methodology used in the paper was not a methodology that is commonly used in the USA. On principle, she refused to accept the comments of the reviewers and challenge their views. After much toing and froing, she muscled her way into getting the editor to acknowledge that the methodology was authentic and valid. Eventually, the paper was published. If this was not such a prominent scholar, there is a high probability that the paper would never have been published. I'm moving on to now the whole concept of geographic bias, right? it is a commonly held view that science seeks to identify the truth. And as such, the truth should stand alone and not depend on the person who proclaims it. However, this view doesn't hold much water as there is a tendency to succumb to the various stereotypes, one of which is geographic bias. These stereotypes support the presupposition that products originating from the global north countries are perceived as better products than those coming from the global south countries. Geographic bias is multi-layered. One, the content is primarily about the global north. Two, the authors in the knowledge distribution process are from the global north. And three, the knowledge production and distribution process are governed by global north, by the global north. The geographic knowledge is the geographic control, the control of knowledge from the marginalized countries is affirmed by Henry Jung, who makes reference to the production and dissemination of social science knowledge. He says that firstly, there's an extreme unequal knowledge about certain geographic units. For example, there are more research on certain regions and or countries. This is despite the quest for indigenous knowledge. Secondly, this knowledge is unevenly produced and disseminated by scholars in the global north. Okay. This skewed knowledge distribution landscape is captured by Skopek and authors who claim that global north and global north-south research gaps still exist, with most contributions originating from global north, from North America, Australia, and Europe. This region receives 77.6% of the world's citation, while the total contribution of the world's citations from Africa, South America, and Oceania is lower than 5%. These authors assert that low citation count may be attributed to bias against global South countries. The bottom line is that if there is that much more published by the global north than the global south, then by default, there will be greater citation count for the content that is published by the global north. The big question is, how big is that publication gap? The second question is, can that gap be closed? And what are the possible strategies for closing that gap? I'm going to quote an example that highlights the issue of geographic bias, right? One of Africa's leading horticulturalists from Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, she shares that when she tried to publish her research in well-recognized international journals, she hit a stone wall. And she says, they did not accept it not because the research was not good, but because they regarded the crops that I was writing about as weeds. Professor Abukota Onyango goes on to state that, and yeah, I quote, my research has shown that African indigenous vegetables have a part to play in addressing three major problems in Africa, and that is poverty, malnutrition, and food insecurity. The desk rejection is driven by the perceived lack of relevance of the research to global North readership. For me, this desk rejection is underpinned by the threat to profit margins of the publishers. Profit margins, it is clear, profit margins undermines excellence in science. The significance of the research for Africa is substantial, but may not have the same significance for the global North, affirming that bias decreases the chances of publication. Professor Abukatsa Onyango found an African open access journal to share her research. She also shares that the improved visibility and accessibility of her research has influenced the Kenyan government in its development of nutritious feeding schemes for Kenyan schools. Other East African governments also developed feeding schemes based on her findings. But what has since happened is that, sorry, I am getting a little bit anxious about the time, I apologize, right? But I will try and round off as quickly as I can. Sorry. The exemplar of Professor Bukotso Onyango demonstrates that the one-directional flow of information, that one-directional flow can be reversed. Progressive open access actions can advance social justice, but the interventions cannot be developed without meaningful consultation with the global South. The 20 years of open access movement running on the spot can be converted to short sprints and long marathons. The low-hanging fruit, such as library publishing, that can be your short sprints. And the mind shift regarding publishing, regarding publisher-driven profit processes can be your long marathons. Just in terms of summation, there will be open access advocates who will slate my views, professing that the movement has made remarkable strides over the last 20 years. I will concede that there is far more content that is freely available today than ever before. The significant question is, how much of that knowledge is the same? Has the open access movement diversified the knowledge economy or the knowledge ecosystem? The social justice principles that I see in the open access movement, those social justice principles have been shared to achieve a specific goal, and that is to make more content available for free. In accelerating the growth of global North content into open, the movement is consolidating the one-directional flow of information, and in so doing, it is solidifying knowledge colonialism. The principles of information democracy are being violated. Exclusion becomes justifiable. Marginalization becomes a casualty of the open access movement. As pointed out by Bruna, Global South authors can now read Global North content, but they are prevented through all of those biases from publishing in the same journals. Jamor and Moja ascribe this barrier to inherent biases in the current knowledge ecosystem. The cost barrier has been replaced by other barriers. The global South, for the global South, it's a step backwards. The knowledge pool will continue to be dominated by the information aristocrats at the expense of the diversification of the knowledge base. For diversity to break through that glass ceiling, there is a desperate need to expunge the inherent biases. It becomes critically important for you and I to become initiators of the re-engineering process as we seek a significant stakeholder in this, as we are significant stakeholders in this knowledge ecosystem. It's imperative that we work towards breaking down those fences that hold us to the one watering hole, because the other watering hole gives us freedom. It gives us freedom to build an inclusive, demarginalized, equitable, and diverse knowledge system. I would like to conclude with two African proverbs. The first is, the sun does not forget a village just because it is small. Just because the global South are outliers does not necessarily mean that they cannot contribute significantly to the diversification of the knowledge ecosystem. The second quote is, it takes a whole village to raise a child. If society is to be strengthened going forward, the global North and the global South need to interact. Diversity of knowledge will bring the global village together for the sake of generations to come. Let us re-engineer the knowledge ecosystem as a collective. Let's re-engineer it as a collective. Expunging bias is the starting point to facilitate the bi-directional flow that Bruna talks about for a truly open and diverse knowledge society. Colleagues, thank you so much for your patience. I apologize for going over time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No worries about time. I think that was fantastic. We all learned a lot. Please join me in thanking Dr. Raju for this presentation. We do have about 5 or so minutes. And Dr. Raju, if you are willing, there are some questions that have come in. So maybe I can ask one of those to you. If we don't get to your question, I apologize. But I think we all learned quite a bit just then. So one question that came in is from Moira March. Thank you for the stimulating talk. Could you talk a little bit about the difference between standards and biases in scholarly review systems?
Again, in terms of scholarly review systems, it is my view that there has to be some level of education in terms of processes within the review systems. From my experience, and reviewers tend to demonstrate their capacity to find flaws in papers, in submissions. If one is setting standards, then one needs to determine what those standards are. Are those standards based on global North criteria? For example, it has to be perfect English. I have absolutely no problem when it comes to the methodology being absolutely significant and the science having impact. For me, those are the two standards that cannot be compromised: the methodology and the actual science. Other than that, the reviewers need to understand that their role is to build scholarship. Their role is to develop the manuscript and not to find fault in it. I hope that answers Moira's question.
Yes, thank you so much. You okay with one more question?
It's a night for me, so I'm here until midnight. So
Don't want to keep you up too long, but another question that came in, and Moira said, great answer, thank you, and that they agree, is coming from Jeff. Are there areas of academic inquiry that are more advanced in breaking down barriers of colonialism, privilege, and exclusion? That is, have some scholars made progress? Or are there areas of research that are more urgent to engage to break the cycles of inequality to outputs, engagement, and publishing?
I'm going to give you a very political response to that. It's like asking how long is a piece of string, because for different communities, different societies, the imperatives are different. For Africa, we would look at advancing rapidly the whole issue of food security and maybe healthcare. Whereas in other communities that may not be that great of a need, because whichever community, there is a sense of advancement in those areas. In Africa, there is a need for that advancement. So in terms of priorities, it's difficult. It depends on what your particular circumstances bring to the fore. So where do we start? I honestly don't know. I don't know, but I think somewhere along the line, there has to be some understanding that the imperatives are different, and there's a need to capture that and to allow that to grow. I'm not a politician, I'm a librarian, but I have to give a political response to that.
Well, thank you. We have about a minute left. I know that there are more questions. I apologize that we can't get to all of them. But Dr. Raju, thank you so much for this thought-provoking, inspirational talk. Lots of people are very giving you lots of thanks in the comments as well. So I hope that you get to read